We have some breaking news to discuss as a brand new report from Frank Saravalli has revealed a major Mitch Marner trade update, and his future in Toronto is becoming more and more clear by the day. So I'm going to break down this wild report and discuss exactly what it entails, as some of it might surprise you. So stay tuned for all that in this episode. But before we do, if you're a part of the large percent who aren't subscribed, make sure to hit that button. We produce daily Leafs content, sometimes multiple videos a day. We go live every single Wednesday. Stay tuned for all that. But Darius, tons of news to go over today. Obviously, we had the Joseph Wall extension earlier in the day, and now we have some breaking news regarding Mitch Marner from Frank Saravalli, and a lot to get into, so let's just not waste any more time. Let's just dive right into it. So Frank Saravalli is saying that the Leafs have no interest in extending Mitch Marner, and last week it was reported by Freeman that they were trying to extend him. They've tried. He asked for $13 million per season over 8 years with no full no movement clause. The Leafs said no thanks. So Darius, a lot of mind games have been being played. Frank Saravalli came out today and basically just said that they have no interest in extending Mitch Marner, and that if a trade were to happen, it would likely be this week, and he thinks the Leafs are going to do everything within their power to try to make something happen. So wild news. We'll really know within the week, because this week we're talking about potentially Mitch Marner getting traded. What are your thoughts on this? It's breaking news for sure.
Yeah, I would take everything in this with a grain of salt at this point, right? Because I think they're negotiating openly through the media at this point, both sides. At first, I thought it was just the Mitch Marner camp and his agent that were doing it. Now this kind of lends to the fact that maybe the Leafs are joining in on the party, because I thought it was pretty quiet. If you really looked at all the reports, it did look like it was really quiet on the Leafs side. But now it seems like they've joined the party and they're full on negotiating through the media here. So that's a lot of fun as well, because obviously that happened back in 2019 as well. And, you know, nothing good is going to come of it, I think. Like, obviously, we're going to get a resolution one way or another coming up here pretty quickly, I think, within the next week, which was mentioned. So it's going to get really interesting real quick. I think by next week, we're going to have an answer of what's going to happen with Mitch Marner. And if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs, honestly, I don't think they want to keep this player. I think, you know, they said after the season ended, like, they got to make moves, they got to move on. And like we've talked about, he's going to be the first domino because he's just the easiest one to move at this point, right? And honestly, when you look at playoffs, the one not performing when they need him the most. So it seems like they're probably going to move off from him. But again, everything that comes out in this situation from both sides, I would take with a grain of salt, because it's not 100% fact. It looks like they're negotiating here through the media and using different insiders to do that.
Yeah, I mean, Darren Dreger literally said the opposite last week.
Yep.
And now you have Frank Saravalli saying the opposite of what Dreger said. So it's definitely a battle between the camps. And obviously the Dreger, he has links to Darren Ferris, who is Mitch Marner's agent. So there's a lot of weird stuff going on. But the one thing that is interesting is that it says that a trade, if it were to happen, it would likely be this week. So if a trade doesn't happen this week, and what he's saying is true, maybe the Leafs, I guess, try to extend him at that point. I don't know exactly what the plan will be if that's the case, because the last thing they want to do is let him go into the season, which is what Darren Ferris directly said, his camp that is, and his agent, that they want to go into the season not extended and then go into UFA after next year. But again, we think that was a marketing ploy. But if he doesn't get traded this week, which obviously we'll have you covered for that, what's next there? Do they just, I guess they continue the negotiations, because it's Frank Saravalli saying this week, and trades will continue to come up. But we'll also have to discuss the July 1st thing where Mitch Marner's signing bonus kicks in.
Yeah, it says this week, but I wonder if they mean, I'm not sure what that means exactly. I'm not sure if he's going to get traded this week. And if he does, then that means it's a sign-in trade, right? Because it's going to be very difficult to move off of that player with his bonus. And even if it is a sign-in trade, I think the other team would still have to pay his bonus. So it's probably going to come after July 1st, and whether it's a sign-in trade or they just trade him, I'm not sure what's going to happen here, right? Because we're getting reports on both sides still, right? And none of it is the actual truth. We don't even know if they're really talking about this, right? And having negotiations. So it does open on July 1st. And I think, like, it's going to be after July 1st. No team is going to want to pay that bonus. I think it's about $7 million, maybe a little bit more than that. So no team is going to want to pay that if they're acquiring him for next season. So they're going to wait till then. But I just wonder now at this point if there is some truth to the extension talks, because it is a sign and trade, right? So there could be truth somewhere hidden in here, but it's not at the forefront, that's for sure.
Yeah, and there has been times in the past, I believe it was the Flames, where they traded one of their players before the bonus kicked in, but they ended up actually paying the bonus out. So I think there's ways you can do that, but I'm not exactly sure why they would necessarily do that unless they just want to get it completely done with. So there's a case where they're able to pay off the bonus. But like you said, it makes a lot more sense for it to probably be a sign and trade. And again, if we zero in on what Saravalli said, I think the Leafs are going to do everything within their power to try and make something happen. And something happen meaning a trade. It has to be a trade at this point because nothing else would really make sense here because they're not talking about an extension. So for Mitch Marner, it's such an interesting time now because if they want to trade him before, obviously, July 1st, and they're kind of on a bit of a timeline, but it would make more sense for everybody if it was next week. But clearly something is up here, and maybe he's hinting, and he's not going to say it this early. I'm sure they're starting to negotiate trades now, but maybe they're starting to get some steam, and nothing's come out yet, so this is just speculation on my part. Maybe they're starting to line up offers from other teams, considering they tried to extend Mitch Marner last week, perhaps, like Friedman said, and now, because they realized that wasn't going to happen, they're starting to line up trade offers for Marner.
So I think the Leafs on their side, they want to move off of this player. And I think Mitch Marner wants to stay in Toronto, right? And they've also shown their cards. I mean, Mitch Marner's camp where they want that extra year in the extension. So I think for both parties to trade him and have it be a sign and trade would work for both parties. Now, it never really happens where both parties are happy at the end of the day. So I'm not sure if that's going to happen, but I think they would maybe want to work towards that, right? You'd think like common sense, maybe work towards that, get him off the team, right? Offload that salary. Another team, another contender gets him. And at the same time, we went through a report that said, he doesn't want to, they're not going to ask him to waive if they don't have a trade lined up. So I'm sure they're looking at that right now, like this week specifically, because it's going to open up next week. So there's still a lot on the table. I think common sense says move off to the player if you're the Leafs. And for the player and his side and his camp, get the extension from the Leafs and a sign and trade, right? And accept the trade somewhere else. But again, it depends where the locations are. Calgary is no longer an option, I think, with Markstrom being gone, right? And then if you look at the Vegas one, that was very interesting. There's only a few, places and opportunities for him now. So, and he's going to have to accept the trade there. So it's going to be very interesting down the stretch here. But I think if you're the Leafs, if you don't move off this player and you sign him to an extension, that would be very odd. I don't believe that whatsoever. That would be really, really odd based on what we've seen with our eyes statistically and what they said after the season. So we'll see.
I don't think an extension is going to happen. I think he's either going to play out the season. Maybe they trade him at the deadline. And we're looking at all these different guys. And again, Friedman said they were trying to extend him. Interesting, maybe on a super cheap deal, but at $13 million over 8 years, which is projected his salary, maybe give or take $1 million here and there. And the question now is what the return will be. We've had discussions about goalies with Linus Ullmark. Obviously, doesn't want to play for the Leafs, but I bring this up because I don't know if they're going to trade for a goalie. They obviously signed Joseph Woll today. That doesn't directly impact it necessarily, but I also am not sure they're going to trade for a goalie that would make a lot more than what they're paying Joseph Woll for. So then you're looking at guys like Stolarz maybe, or Laurent Brossoit, players like that who could maybe make an impact, but I don't know what his framework is, and we haven't really heard much. There's been a lot of rumors about him getting traded, but not what they're targeting in a trade. We know that they offered a deal for Markstrom that was centered around a pick and a prospect. Nick Robertson will probably have a video on that in the future, but there's no indication that they're willing to, or what they're necessarily going for in a trade for Mitch Marner, and I think it's moving away from goalies and maybe more towards the blue line, like we kind of thought all along.
Yeah, even last week, I was starting to feel that way, like you just mentioned, like it's moving away from the goaltender option, right, in a trade. And I think that they're probably going to have to target a defenseman. I think that's what they're going to have to do. And not only that, a lot of people are talking about first round pick this, first round pick that. I think in a Mitch Marner trade, you need pieces that can be effective right now, right, in return. Like, yes, the first round pick would be great, but you're going to need to also get a defenseman that can slot in and make a difference right now, let's say, for example, right? You can't just trade him for futures because it doesn't make sense for this team right now. The most important thing is the salary cap space because you can build the team up in free agency, right? A little bit better, more well-rounded. But to just trade him for futures doesn't make sense either. So I think at this point, it's a defenseman, maybe some depth scoring, right? That maybe you couldn't find in free agency or might be a better option. But I think the goaltender thing, like you said, might be off the table unless, it's the Vegas trade, which could make some sense. Maybe that's, that lends something to why they signed Woll. But we're not sure at this point. There's nothing concrete, really. There's just a lot of different scenarios, which is fun too.
Yeah, maybe Logan Thompson and Shea Theodore, like a package like that could work. But again, I don't think any major trades regarding goalies are going to happen. And again, I don't think they're going to be trading for picks necessarily either. We just saw them dangle a first-round pick for a 34-year-old Jacob Markstrom. So if they're super worried about picks and building for the future, I don't think they would have dangled that. I think they would have tried to, they're trying to win now, and I think a trade will reflect that either way. But let us know in the comments what your thoughts are on this update. Bit of a wild one. We're going to have you covered all the way through, and maybe a trade will happen this week, so make sure you turn on the notifications, because we'll have you stay tuned. So